Right, good morning. Welcome back. There's been a lot of interest in social enterprises in Hong Kong in recent years, perhaps right after the financial crisis in '97. And there's been a lot of talk, anecdotal stories about perhaps a diamond cap, and we heard a lot of it, and you have seen it on the streets running around. But there's been very little work that tries to develop theory, kind of a theory developing type of research to try to understand what's going on behind what we call high performing or high performance organizations, particularly high performing social enterprise. And what I mean by that is there are some social enterprises in Hong Kong that actually grow really fast, and this is one of them. And they are creating a lot of social impact, and they're generally known as one of the exemplars or case of social enterprise in Hong Kong that sets the tone for the rest of the sector. And also, with regards to that, there's been so a diamond cap is actually, if I draw the analogy of people who like to drink coffee, there is a specialty coffee out of the mainstream coffee. So what they do here is actually creating a specialty taxi market out of the mainstream taxi market. So there's a lot of interesting things here. So in a sense, they also, Diamond Cap is also an institutional entrepreneurs because they're trying to change the institutions, so to speak. So with regards to that, Diamond Cap, I'll go through as I go through the slides. I can give a bit more detail. So social entrepreneurship, as we all know, there's a lot of definitions of what it is, and some people call it like contested concepts because there's no one particular definitions about it. But generally, people tend to agree that it's about pursuing social goals and using business principles. And some people take it from a different angle, call it hybrid organizing, because what social enterprise is all about is where they combine social welfare logic and commercial logic into one organization. And there's a lot of tensions behind it, which is still a hot area of research. And also, people talk about social enterprise as organizations that have both identity, that have utilitarian or commercial, as well as normative and altruistic. But people also look at social entrepreneurship as a platform, an organization or system to empower people, particularly the marginalized people, with a predominant focus on wealth or value creation instead of wealth creation. And a lot of the studies so far has been focused on the Anglo-Saxon perspective because a lot of these social enterprises actually were rooted from this region, and a lot of recent interest in Africa, but there's been not much done on this particularly in East Asian context. If you look at some of the institutional factors that people talk about, social origins, institutions, we all know that institutions shape how we think, how we believe, how we act. And so there's been a lot of talk that these institutions and social origins affect how and why people want to become social entrepreneur and what they do and how they do it. And as I alluded earlier, after the financial crisis '97, there's been a change in how the Hong Kong government is approaching social problems. In the past, there is more like a passive giving, but right after the crisis, there's been more of emphasis of empowering these people in accordance to the empowerment perspective, giving people welfare to work type of and this is where all the social enterprise things start to happen. But we still don't know much about the social enterprise in Hong Kong. What are the what factors or what how can we use some sort of theory to understand what are the factors behind the successful development of high performing social enterprise, and what did the leaders do? And they are very important. So what I did in this study is looking at, and this is just one of the a large-scale study that we have done in CDU, and this is just one of the cases that we're trying to use to actually to build a theory to generalize to theory, or what they call analytical generalization, instead of generalizing to the entire population, or what they call statistical generalization. So what I did here is actually looking at doing a number of in-depth interviews with the founder, Doris Leung, whom many of you have heard maybe in the newspaper, and one of the CEO of Social Ventures Hong Kong, a venture philanthropy organization, Mr. Francis Ngai. And I talked to them, also invited them many times to my course in CDU, in social entrepreneurship, where we asked them to talk about what they do and various things. And I also attended their talk in SE Summit, where layers and layers of information are built up, because every time when they come, they talk a slightly different thing about what they're doing, what they've done, and why, and so, and the failure and successes. And also looking at media articles as supplementary data. And it's actually a very iterative process as I've gone through the data, going back to theory and the data. So collecting a lot of rich and thick data, transcribe the data, and try to do some analysis. The first part is about the personal values and the prior knowledge of the founder. As we know, Doris Leong, the founder, actually she comes from a middle class background, but she grew up with a lot of sense of, or being taught a sense of social justice or injustice, and being very aware of social issues and activism at a very young age. After universities, and she studied actually at PolyU in communication, and she became a journalist later in iCable, and she covered a lot of social issues and poverty, elderly, and that's where I think it sensitized her to a lot of social problems, and that's where it increases what they call entrepreneurial alertness, to see that this is a certain problem and we can do something about it. But at the time, because of one of the other factors, she hasn't really acted anything yet until she experienced a personal distress in which her mother was actually diagnosed and suffered from a brain tumor, and she had to take her mother in and out to the hospital and doctor appointments, which is very, very difficult for her. And either she has to drive or she has to take a taxi, and normal taxi are not really that accustomed to serving a disabled elderly type of passengers. So it's creating a lot of difficulties. As she said, she experienced frustration in taking her mother to the frequent doctor visits. And at the same time, she observed a popular, what we call illegal vans running around in Hong Kong. They are typically not suited actually for human, particularly for the elderly, because the same van is used to carry vegetables, chickens, and so it's lacking hygiene. There's some smell. It's also about human dignity. I mean, how we can mix human with animals in one place, and there's big advertisements that's like to show us during her talk about how poor this type of van would be. And then one of the untold story behind this is actually, so she was sensitized to these ideas. She saw there's opportunities. She saw there's some problems here, some existing solutions didn't work. So she sought ideas from what they call the 30s group. Actually, you can Google them, who they are. There's a bunch of professionals from different sectors, from IT, accounting, law, and others, who volunteered to help Hong Kong after the SARS 2003. So she sought ideas and bounced off ideas, and she actually met Francis Ngai through this conversation, and she got a lot of ideas, and her ideas were validated by these guys. And it happens that Social Ventures Hong Kong had a lot of interest in this, as they are actually looking for opportunities to invest in social enterprises. And that's how Diamond Cap was set up in 2010. SVSK provided funding, support, expertise. What Diamond Cap is doing is actually very similar like any taxi company. They buy taxi license, and then they rent the taxi to taxi drivers who take orders. So actually what Diamond Cap is doing is sharing the risk with these individual taxi drivers. So she also relies on a partner taxi called Center to do the operation. So it's actually trying to do a very lean operations, not to overinvest. This is one of the principles in entrepreneurship, to underinvest by relying on other people's resources. And then she even signed up with the two large elderly homes in Hong Kong as partner, and they actually become their captive market because elderly needs those services. So that's a snapshot of what the taxi looked like. So it's a specialty taxi market from the ground up. If you want to get this taxi or call for a taxi, you can just hail it from the street. What we learned is you have to make a 24-hour booking in advance, and there's a flat charge, which is much higher than normal, but then there's also additional charges. The taxi drivers pay a fixed per trip or per day rent from Diamond Cap, and then they can keep the remainder as their income. Diamond Cap also sells a lot of mini Diamond Cap model and doing sedan chair and doing a lot of other things. So they have 6 taxis and a lot of trips, and they've been voted as one of the best social enterprise by some UK award organizations. Also recently by Cartier, and they got a lot of media exposure. So the gist of this is trying to theorize what drives this high performance in Diamond Cap. The first of all, old story, but basically is about Michael Porter. Talk about focus. So what we can see here, what happens in Diamond Cap is actually using a focus strategy. They try to create a specialty taxi market and develop its organizational capabilities. What they do is they try to focus on doing one thing. So what we see is, in comparison with some other social enterprises that I've looked at in Hong Kong and elsewhere, some social enterprises at the very early stage, critical stage of its development, they're trying to do too many things at once. So in a sense, they are lacking or losing the opportunity to quickly develop that expertise in the specific things they're doing, because this is a very specific field. So by being very focused, it allows very hockey stick growth, allow them to kill bad ideas very quickly and find where the opportunity spaces. So they know now where the opportunity, where is the non-opportunity for them. So, and also being focused allow them to build a very clear organizational identity, and people know what Diamond Cap stands for, what it is, and why they exist. So it helps the audience like us outside of Diamond Cap to relate to what they're doing. They also, because of the personal distress, she has a lot of compassion, particularly because it's about her mother. So this compassion is actually a very important thing in helping her having those what we call social design orientation, to be able to design an artifact that solves a social problem and come up with some new models. Apart from the taxi as a hardware, there's also the per trip per day compensation model is very new. It's not the usual style or type of compensation model that the mainstream taxi industry is using. So that is actually one of the things. So, and I recall the conversation with her in which she talked about she's facing a lot of constraints. So these are actually institutional constraints. When she was approaching existing taxi owners to help her start this up, she got many rejections, and they didn't believe this idea. They don't want to support her. But eventually, about last year, one or two competitors start to come up, enter the market using very similar type of taxi as what we see in Diamond Cap's taxi. So she tried to break that institutional barrier and recreate a new market, and even she have to recreate her own repair, because there's no repair for Toyota Noah, because they use a Toyota Noah. There's no expert car mechanics to fix this type of car. So she even have to co-create this experience with the car mechanics shop, one of the uncles I think in Mongkok. And importantly, she uses what we call social bricolage. Bricolage is one of the techniques, or one of the big theories in organization science, in which you make do with what you have at hand. So instead of over-investing, so they make what they call bricolage, to make do what you have, even with what other people have, and put them together so you can start something cheaply, and if you fail cheaply. So it's not going to be very costly. Why does he use social bricolage? Because he's facing a very high uncertainty, or what people call it true uncertainty or 19 uncertainty, because this market didn't exist before. No one has done it. No one has attempted this specialty taxi market in the past. By doing so, she's actually was able to show that bricolage is actually working in this case. And the other thing is about the role of formal and informal advice networks. As I mentioned earlier, the 30s group is actually one of the very important informal advice networks that Doris Leung used to help validate the initial idea that she had. And SVHK, Social Ventures Hong Kong, is the official partner that then helped with a lot of other resources. So we can see there's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas and taking this up. So in terms of theorizing this back to the case, we can see I think the importance of looking back to the traits-based perspective and situational thesis of social entrepreneurs' motivation, because in the literature on entrepreneurship, people are shying away from traits because you can't distinguish the good or successful, not successful ones based on their traits. But what we can see here in the social entrepreneurship, the trait is very important. In particular, we look at the role of personal values, the sense of justice, compassion, activism, as one of the possible drivers of this type of traits-based perspective. And the other type is situational thesis of human behavior. There's a book about how people become terrorists after they play some games, or people become very violent in what they call Stanford prison experiment. So what we can also see here, the personal distress, the situation where Doris Leung was in, was actually creating that possibility for her to engage and become a social entrepreneur. But without that particular situations, she may continue to become a journalist. So we can also see the role of prior experience, being her experience as a journalist is actually helping her in developing a very successful social enterprise. And we know that they're very good in doing media work and generating a lot of interest from the media, so they don't even need to pay any advertisements, which is one of the major costs for an enterprise. And she get a lot of publicity and people get to know what they are. And she's also through that experience, she's being sensitized to the social problem and to become alert or entrepreneur alertness to the particular opportunity to develop a social enterprise. The second part is about the importance, it highlights the importance of the social embeddedness in a social entrepreneurship action. What we can see here is the role of constructivism view as ontological perspective, or when people ask, where does the opportunity come from? What we can see here in the case of Diamond Cap is the opportunity for this come from a collective act, a very dynamic and complex process of sense-making and sense-giving, such that they can see that there is an opportunity for this particular type of market. And they also use social bricolage to manage or to deal with institutional resource constraints, and to rely on, it also highlights the importance of informal as well as formal networks that people know as important drivers in new venture formation. And one other part is the importance of social design in the face of non-existent market. We can see the role of focus strategy, creating or crafting opportunity space to know where the opportunity is and where the not opportunity is. And they don't have any prototype or template opportunity because this market didn't exist before. And that's why the social design orientation is very important. So what this case teach us perhaps is it highlights individual network and strategy as organization strategy level factors that underpin high-performing social enterprise, but also perhaps open up a new promise about the micro foundations of social entrepreneurship. So there's been not much talk about the study on the micro foundations, the people, because a lot of the studies has now focused on the organizations. What do they do? How the institutions is affecting social entrepreneurs? But there's a lack of study about themselves as individuals, why they do it, how they do it, and how their traits are actually affecting particularly their emotions, their cognition, their behavior, affecting what happens in a social enterprise. It also tells us the workings of a social bricolage. Now, but we also don't know where is the boundary of social bricolage for social enterprise. Does bricolage always help or facilitate high-performing social enterprise? But could it also hinder or prevent a social enterprise? Where is the boundary? So these are the things that we still don't know and still perhaps are future research questions. And also the role of informal institutions as the early supporter, because sometimes when you have an idea to set up a social enterprise, you talk to a social venture capital, you may not get a very good response because it's such a very initial idea. And talking to some informal institutions, some individuals who may have an interest or some passion might be easier to get that early support and get some initial validation and etc. So that's pretty much it. I'm faster than the best person. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Yanto, for a very succinct presentation, but I think very vivid as well. So let's call for questions from the floor. Anyone like to? Yes.
I'm curious as to using of this case in any of your classes, whether it's in GE or in any other area.
Actually, we use this as one of the core readings in the class. So we get students to discuss. So I invite Doris Leung to the class. Before that, I already put up the case material online for the students to download. And when Doris Leung to the class, students have pre-exposed to the material, so they can engage in a deeper conversation with her. So I think that in a sense is really helping the teaching environment. Yeah.
Thank you for this. I wonder if you could say more about social bricolage as to how you teach students about how students, especially in a high resource environment like Wong, where lots of things are here, but lots of things are very specified as to what they're used for. So it's a different way to think about the environment and the resources in it towards achieving a goal. I think in poor places, people do it all the time just to live. But in wealthy places, there's new skills to be learned in this area. And I wonder, well, how would you design student learning activities around this concept?
I think that's a very fantastic question. Exactly that's what we do. So what I do in the course is I derive theories or concepts from 40, 50 years of research in that area and transform them into actionable principles. And one of the principles is actually the Preclass that I teach the students. Of course, Hong Kong is a bit different from, let's say, the poor village in India, but what we do is when the students are forming groups, because at the end of the semester they need to create projects and present a social business plan, we start with them as individuals, and they won't have money to invest in something. So we ask them to think of, for example, that resource and that resources. I'll give you one example. A law students in our group, one of the best groups in the class, they come up with a device that can help young people, male, female, from being abused by others. And that actually has a component of video recording and alarm and some of the things that can do different things that the prior technologies didn't do. And when I discuss and coach them, so there's a lot of coaching process, eventually I got to the idea that they are actually using Preclass to assemble these different ideas. There are some that do eye spray or pepper spray, some is doing a loud alarm, some is doing video. So what they do is, in a sense, they're actually Preclassing this existing technology into one package. So I think it's in a sense it gives them to see connections instead of looking at very linear, or calculating net present value, for example. But this is like actually doing things, and actually it's also being influenced by their knowledge as being law students. They need to capture evidence, which is a very big, important construct for law students. Like how you capture evidence. If you can capture evidence, you can use that in the court, in the police. So that developed into an output, actual output, and they are now entering competitions as well. So we're having fun.
I'm interested in thanks. I'm interested in the diamond cap model, and thanks very much for discussing it and social bricolage. I wonder if you could make comments on the various partners that Doris has engaged besides Francis Nine, and particularly how she's managed to break through the capital constraint, because this is a highly capital-intensive business that she's in. So maybe you could explain the capital intensity and also the partnering in your model.
So I think part of the Preclass is, apart from the official capital from Social Ventures Hong Kong, they also have the two elderly homes as partners. They all contributed some amount of funding as well, while also providing captive passengers, a captive market, the elderly market in the elderly home for the diamond cap. They also have, what I know is, they try to underinvest by working together with existing taxi call center. So instead of setting up her own, which is extremely expensive, and how many manpower do they have, she rely on existing manpower in a large taxi company to handle the reservation. And she has her own one person actually to do that, to help. So, and they have only a 2-person operations. So you can see how much cost they're trying to cut in order to start this up. Versus someone who start with a big goal and work backwards and say, I need to, how much this is investment I needed to start this up. So she just modeled through, in a sense, to use as little resources as possible, which is very common perhaps in the .com in the 1990s. Invest cheaply and fail cheaply and fast, and then you can move on.
Well, I think the concept of social recolage is somehow similar to the concept of social capital. So they're trying to connect things. Now, I got a question for you that because we still have some time. If we pull your research back to the topic of service leadership, here you talk about social entrepreneurship, right? In one of the slides, you talk about personality traits versus situation-specific characteristics. So my question is, do you think service leaders are inborn, or do you think we'll actually shape this through education? Now, I asked this question because I talked to Jim last night, and exactly we talked about this because he said that he would start some work in USC, similar to what we're doing here. But he said his dean is not taking a position that we can do much when the kids are grown up. Okay? So basically, I remarked that, okay, your dean is basically Freudian. So he might believe that personality is rather fixed by the age of 3 or 5. Okay? So my view is, okay, here you talk about personality traits. So what's your view regarding, say, a successful social entrepreneur or successful service leader? Do you think education really helps them? Or do you think we need more recolage or strategy, things like that?
Very interesting questions. I would like to say that I think it goes both ways. Both exist. There may be some part that are inborn, some part that they can be shaped through education and practice. We are still we're just scratching the surface to give a very definitive answers in terms of how much, even in the broader 40, 50 years of research on entrepreneurship, people try to see commercial entrepreneurs. They still couldn't found. Some people try to study the genetics, the DNA. So what they do is they found identical twins. They get the data from the hospitals and they trace who become entrepreneur, who become non-entrepreneur. And eventually what they found is the DNA, the genetics is playing still a very tiny role to their ability to become a commercial entrepreneur. So I'm not sure whether that helps, but yeah, I mean, it helps if someone have that sense of personality and others. But I think we in the education sector, it's our role, I think, to inspire them. And I like to borrow maybe from a field that you're more familiar with, positive psychology. So I always use that in my classroom. I tell the students that you can do these things. This is not always given to someone, but you can develop these things, and you can take it as like the notion of expertise. How well you can play a chess depends on how many years you invest in learning how to play the chess. So actually, people say you need 10 years to build an expertise in a certain area. So if you invest in it, so that's how I try to encourage the students. So they don't think that I'm not born with it. I don't have this in me, and I shouldn't be doing it at all. We don't know. Maybe some people, they don't have it inborn, but they may end up doing that anyway. So I'm not sure. Maybe if there are any social entrepreneurs who feel that they're not born with that inborn traits, and then they become a social entrepreneur, I'd like to know their story and tell us. Maybe there will be something interesting, and we can compare. So it's a very good question, and so I think maybe both ways can help. Yeah.
I just an additional comment. Actually, I talked to Jim last night. My answer is that, in fact, a lot of colleagues in the School of Business, they know very little about research in public health. Because if we believe that personality is basically determined, there is no need to talk about, say, anti-smoking programs or prevention programs. And in fact, public health believes that people can change.
Right.
That is, it depends on what kind of mechanisms you are manipulating in the process. Right. And I also think it goes back to the question of what kind of image of man we have. So for us, we are doing service leadership education. I think a very cardinal belief should be that through service leadership education, students can grow and they can be nurtured to be service leaders.
I like that. I love that.
So do I. Well, let's conclude on that positive and appropriate note. Thank you very much.
Thank you.